Today's shiur is found at the beginning of the new parak, the 9th parak of Nedarim, top of Samach Daled. This is a parak that you'll notice is a rather short parak. It measures 3 dapim in length. The topic of this parak is the absolution of vows. One who had vowed and wants it absolved, he approaches a Talmud Chacham, a Torah sage, and through a discussion between them, the result will be the annulment of the vow. There are 2 different tracks that exist for vow annulment. One is called Charota, and the other is referred to by the term Pesach. Charota is a situation where a person simply expresses his regrets over having made the vow. Whether or not that method is effective in having the vow rescinded is dependent on different opinions. The other method is through a discussion. It's revealed that the one who made the vow, had he known certain information that he didn't know of at the time that he made the vow, so he never have made the vow. So one is a direct expression of regret concerning the vow itself. That's charota, which we won't be focusing on in our discussion. The other has to do with Pesach, and in order to really appreciate that, we have to see the examples. So the topic heading that we have included on the side of the Gemara, the Nosei, we've written Shtei Kulos Shel Rabbi Eliezer ben Nedarim. 2 points of leniency will be featured on the part of Rabbi Eliezer regarding vows. Number 1, Poischin b'chvoid ava v'imo. 1 point, and you can see in the text, you'll find that's illustrated with a Roman numeral number 1. 1 is that we can motivate the person to have his vow rescinded through mentioning to him that if your vow continues, so that will bring dishonor to your parents. And the second leniency that Rabbi Eliezer has is called Poischin Benolad, where there were circumstances that were not present at the time that he took the vow, that he made the vow. The circumstances that we introduce to the client are circumstances that arose only later on. According to Rabbi Eliezer, we can use the later developed circumstances as a basis for absolving the individual, the client, from his vow. I know that sounds a bit abstract, but we'll see it in a more concrete form as we go into the text. The Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Poischin li Adam b'chvod ava v'imo, v'chachomim oisrin. Rashi at the top, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Poischin li Adam b'chvod ava v'imo, she'omrim lo. We tell the client, the chacham, the sage would say to the person who has the vow, Ilu hoyisa yodea, had you known, sheyomru alavicha, that they will say regarding your father, Oilo la'av shegodel ben Rasha kazeshu porutz benadar, woe unto a man like you who raised a son that's so free with vowing. Shekain Rishonim darkan lindor, it's the way of the wicked to vow. As we said in the first parak of this Masechta, V'im Omar, love, if the son would respond, no, I didn't know that, they would say that about my father. Dilu ho'isi yodea lo ho'isi no there. Had I known that that's the way people would speak about my father, I wouldn't have vowed. Matirin lo. We will use that information to absolve him of the vow. The Chachomim Osrin, Rashi says, why do the Chomim not accept this? Isn't it so that the fellow said, well, had I known that, would I say that about my father? I wouldn't have vowed. So they say, Shafilu ein daitu l'schare, noisnim lo das lomar sheyischare. What we're fearful of is someone who really doesn't regret having taken the vow, even with the shame brought onto his father. He would be too embarrassed to say otherwise. So it's almost as if he's being led into saying, I wouldn't have done it so as to preserve his parents' esteem. But in truth, the Chachamim are fearful that this guy would have vowed anyway. Simply out of embarrassment, he says, I wouldn't have vowed, when in fact he would have. Omar Rebbe Tzadok, Ad shepoischin loy b'chvod ava v'imo, yiftach loy b'chvod hamokoim. We look at the Rosh to appreciate this. Yiftach loy b'chvod hamokoim. The Rosh commentary that we're reading is found to the lower extreme of the narrow lines. Bo lahakshos al divrei Rabbi Eliezer. The Mishnah at this point, namely Rabbi Tzadok, is coming to ask on Rabbi Eliezer, Ki hechi de poischin b'chvod ava v'imo, just like you are willing to have the Pesach in terms of parents' esteem, v'lo chayshinon shemo yishaker, and you don't seem to be worried that the guy might be lying. In other words, he sincerely regrets having his parents be cast in a bad light. Well, then yiftachu lo nami b'chvod hamokom v'yomru lo. Then a Pesach using the honor of the Almighty should also be a suitable means of absolution, and say to the client, had you known that you would be considered wicked in the eyes of God, would you have vowed? And you see that we don't do that. So that's what Rabbi Tzadok is objecting to. Let us take a look at Rashi's explanation as well. Rashi on the third narrow line from the beginning of the narrow lines. Rabbi Tzadok goymer ad shepoischin lo b'chvodova v'imoi v'chulei. Klomar im kein yicholim liftach lo b'chvodova v'imo poslo nami b'chvod hamokom. If, as you say, you can base the absolution on parents' honor, why not base the absolution on the Almighty's honor? Sheyicholim loymar lo nami shekeneged HaKadosh Baruch Hu oiseh shenoidev v'roshehu l'shamayim. By vowing, you are wicked in the eyes of heaven. So the Gemara, the Mishnah continues. Im kain, if you were to accept that, then ein Nedarim. This is, if you look in the Rosh commentary, Heshivu Chachamim de Rebbe Eliezer Meha lo Tesayon. The opinion that defends Rebbe Eliezer would say you're not making a point by suggesting liftoach b'chvod hamokom. Diaf Rebbe Eliezer modeh b'ha devadai yishoker. You can't compare poischin b'chvod avavimo to poischin b'chvod hamokom. In this case, if you were to tell someone, had you known that by vowing you would be wicked in the eyes of God, would you have vowed? Here he'll definitely lie. The lo chotzef inish kuli hai shiomar. A person, no one would say, yeah, I would have vowed anyway. Shiomar shalohoya meniach b'shvil zeh. That because of the honor of God, even with the honor of God in mind, I still would have vowed. The Lodomi, and the Rosh here expands his idea a bit further. But the main point is that in the case, and this is Rabbi Eliezer's point, that in the case of parents' honor, since in potential a person would have said, well, in all due respect to my parents, I would have vowed anyway. When he says, Oh, had I known my parents' esteem would have been brought into question, I wouldn't have vowed. We believe him. And once again, why is that? Because people might say, I would have vowed anyway, even though my parents' honor would have been besmirched. However, no one would say that even though God's honor has been questioned, I would have vowed anyway. No one would say that. Therefore, when a person says, had I known that God's honor would have been brought into question, I wouldn't have vowed, we can't trust that. We continue in the Mishnah. Umoidim chachamim l'Reb Eliezer b'davar shebeinoi levein aviv v'imoi shepoischen lo b'chvoid aviv v'imoi. The chachamim who didn't accept the idea of poischen b'chvoid aviv v'imo, however, if it's a matter that the vow, let's say, directly affected his mother or father, that in a case like that, the honor of the parents can be used as a basis for absolution. The Rosh is very, very terse on this, and he says, "B'davar shebeino levein avivimo kagon shehidir aviv," where a man directly imposed a vow upon his father or against his father. There, the Chachamim agree that the idea of kavod avivimo can be used as a basis of absolution. V'od Omar Rabbi Eliezer. The word v'od means, in this case, another leniency of Rabbi Eliezer is poischen benolad. We'll see more examples of this as we go on in the Mishnah itself, but right now it means you can use as the basis of absolution information that wasn't present at the time of the vow. V'chachamim oisrin, the chums do not allow poischen benolad. Ketzad. Now illustrations. And you can see on the side under the Mivneh heading, the structural note, we have a volcano shape or a trapezoid, and the word konem is highlighted. And we've written, these are dugmois shel nolad. The double underline mark you can see are examples that will appear in the Mishnah that reflect the idea of nolad. Nolad literally means something that is born. And in this context, it means that at the time of the vow, it had not yet been around. It was born later on. The Mishnah continues with the examples. Omar koinim she'eni nene li'ish ploni. He vows not to benefit from so-and-so. V'naseh soifer. And that so-and-so became a scribe. A scribe is a person that prepares documents, and he is someone upon whom everyone is dependent. So at the point that the person vowed not to benefit from Mr. X, Mr. X was not yet a scribe. Later on he became a scribe. And if the Madir here is the one who makes the vow, through the vow isn't going to be able to benefit from this guy now, it's going to be a big loss to him. So he wants to have the vow absolved. So if you hold poischen benolad, then you can use this information as the basis of absolution. O shehoya masi es beno. A person, when he made the vow, the subject of the vow had a child, but wasn't of marriageable age, or it wasn't anticipated that the child was going to get married. And as time went on, the mudar then was marrying off his child, and if the vow would take hold, so the vower wouldn't be able to go to the wedding. There's a comment made in the Tosfos which reflects what we just said. There's a little star in the second line of the wide lines of the Tosfos commentary. O shemasi beno v'tzorch likonis lebeisa l'chubas beno, and he has to go into the house to participate in the wedding. The Mishnah continues. The Omar, and the one who made the vow, says, Ilu ho'is yodea shehu nasa soifer she hoya masi es beno bekoroiv lo hoyisino there. Had I known that so and so was going to become a sofer, or that so and so was going to marry off his child soon after I had made the vow, well, I wouldn't have made the vow. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, that is a basis of absolution. According to the Chachamim, no. Koinim l'bayezeh shani nichnas. Person vowed not to enter a particular house. The Naseh Beis HaKnesses, and that house was converted into a shul, into a synagogue. Omar, and the vower says, Ilu hoyisiyodea shu Naseh Beis HaKnesses, had I known that structure would have been converted into a synagogue, lo hoyisino there, I wouldn't have vowed. Rebbe Lezer matir, Rebbe Lezer says that is an acceptable absolution, and v'chachomim Ozer, and the Chomim say not so. So you have a fundamental machloikis between the Chachomim and Reb Lezer whether you can use nolad as the basis for vow absolution. As far as what is the source for this, the Gemara will deal with this later on Omid Beis. The Gemara, my ein Nedarim. Use your arrow that you see to the immediate left-hand side of the Gemara text and align it with the arrow above. The response we saw in the Mishnah was Im Kain Ein Nedarim. What do we mean by that? So we take a look, in order to appreciate the Gemara's question, we look in the Rashi. You see the Rashi 4 lines from the end. My ein nedarim de ka'omar le Rabbi Tzadok le Rabbi Eliezer ein nedarim. What was his intention when he said that? So, in answer to that, we see in the Gemara 2 answers. Abaye, and at the top of Omid Bey's Rava, we read in the Gemara, Ma Omar Abaye im kain ein nedarim nitorin yofeh. We look in the Ran, my ein nedarim, Omar Abaye im kain, ein nedarim nitorim yafeh, shafilu im mitchila, lo hoya nimna mipnei kvod hamokom. Even if at the time he made the neder, at the time he vowed, he would have made the vow anyway, even if it would be a disparagement to the Almighty. Lo yoiz ponov bekach lefnei chacham v'yeshakir v'yoymar lo yisyodea lo yisinoder. He wouldn't be so bold to express that feeling in front of the chacham, but rather he will lie and he will say, "Oh, had I known that it would be a disparagement to the Almighty, I certainly would not have vowed." Once again, that's a lie. In truth, this guy would have vowed anyway. Nimtza shein nedarim mutorin yofeh. As a result of that, the absolution is really not an absolution. Mishum hachi moeder Rebbe Eliezer the Rabbanan, and as a result of this, Rebbe Eliezer at this point would agree with the Rabbanan shein poisel lo bekvod hamokom, that you don't use that, the issue of kvod hamokom, the honor of the Almighty, as a basis for vow absolution. Umiu bechvod aviv v'imo polik. However, when it came to honor of parents, there Rebbe Eliezer disagrees. The Rabbanan asri, the Rabbanan say no, even with kvod aviv v'imo, we will not permit that as being the basis of an absolution. The sevira lahu, the Rabbanan are of the opinion, lo shna b'chvod hamokom v'lo shna b'chvod aviv v'imo. No distinction is made between these two. Ein Adam meiz hilkoch ein poschen. A person would not be so bold as to say in front of the chacham that I would have vowed anyway. And since that potential doesn't exist, when he says, "Oh, I certainly would not have vowed, had I known that, it would have been a disparagement," we just don't rely on him. Rebbe Eliezer Savar, B'chvod HaMokom, Hu Dein Odam Meiz. It's true that with regard to Kvod HaMokom, a person wouldn't be meiz panim, he wouldn't be so bold as to say that he would have vowed anyway in front of when he's present in front of the chacham. But with regard to the honor of one's parents, he would have told the chacham, I know it's at their honor or expense, but I would have vowed anyway. Therefore, we will rely on that for Pesach, namely, we will trust the guy when he says, oh, had I known that would have been a disparagement to my parents, I would not have vowed, that he is saying that truthfully and not simply in order to save face. So as far as Abaye is concerned, when Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah says, "Oh, im kain ein nedarim," it means that if you would rely on poschim b'chvod hamokom, so then, as Abaye says, ein nedarim nitorin yafe, it wouldn't be a reliable basis for absolving vows. We continue at the top of Omid Beis. The Rava Omar, Rava, he explains the expression in the Mishnah of Ein Nedarim. He says, Im Kain Ein Nedarim Nisholim L'chacham. According to Rava, if you're going to allow Poschim B'chvod HaMokom, then people will not go to sages for vow absolution. Rashi at the top says, Ein Nedarim Nishon L'chacham Shomer B'libo. The person would say to himself, Mali Leilech Eitzel Chacham. Why should I go to the Chacham? Lo tzarich, I don't need to go. Devadai mutarhu. It certainly is a released and annulled vow. The kol kach haneu umatiro hu ba'atzmo. Ve'haTorah omra. The problem with this is HaTorah omra. The Torah says lo yachel dvaro hu eino mochel v'lo achirim mochelim lo. A person cannot absolve himself of his own vows. You need a chacham to absolve the vow. The Ran elaborates, and we look at the Ran on the top line. V'Rav Amar im kain ein nedarim nishon l'chacham im kain the posel b'chvod hamokom. Rabbi Eliezer says back to Rabbi Tzadok in the Mishnah that if you would be able to be posech b'chvod hamokom, that you would be able to absolve a person of his vows because of the disparagement to the Almighty. Lo yu nedarim nishon l'chacham shekol echad ve'echad posech pesach zel atzmo. Everyone would use this as a pesach for himself. Shrei pesach zel roi l'chol nedarim. This is a type of opening for absolution that's relevant to every neder. So that if you were to use kvod hamokom as the basis of vow absolution, there would be no one would ever approach chachomim, sages, for vow absolution. The Tosfos has a slightly different twist to this. The Tosfos commentary says, Ein nedarim nishon l'chacham im poschim b'chvod hamokom below charot acheres. If you would be using the honor of Hashem as the basis without any additional expression of regret, kol echad v'echad yatir nidro b'fnei asmo. Everyone will annul their own vows. V'yasi l'zulzuli, and people will come to be very offhanded with regard to vows. So right now we have a machlokes between Abaye and Rava in the interpretation of the Mishnah of Ein Nedarim. The Gemara continues, Tanan, Umoidim chachamim l'Reb Eliezer b'davar shebeino levein aviv v'imo shepoischin loi b'chvoid aviv v'imo. The chachamim, who originally were opposed to a Pesach based on Kvod Avivimo, when it comes to a neder that's Beino Levein Avivimo, then you can use this Pesach. Bishlamor L'Abaye, the Omar Im Kain Ein Nedarim Nitorin Yafeh. With regard to Abaye's approach, that if you were to use Kvod HaMokom, so then you wouldn't have a reliable Pesach. In this case, why do the Chachamim agree with Rebbe Eliezer with regard to a Pesach b'chvod avivimo? In this case, kevan the ich siflei, since you're dealing with someone that was so bold so as to make a neder against his own parents, where he prohibited his folks from benefiting from his properties, you can assume then, ha ich siflei, This guy who made such a vow is probably a big chutzpan, or a big mechutzaf. He's a person of that demeanor, and therefore, if he says, had I known that by vowing thusly my parents' honor would have been disparaged, you can rely on this guy that he must be telling the truth, because this kind of guy would just as well have said, oh, I don't care about their honor, I would have vowed anyway. So, with Abaye's approach to the Mishnah about if you were to use Kavod HaMokum, you would have a weakness in the basis of the HaTorah because of our suspecting whether people will tell the truth. We understand then here in this quote from the Seif of the Mishnah why the Chacham are Modereb to Rebbe Lezer in a case of a neder that's Beino Leveino Vavimo. Elo L'Rava Diamar Im Kain Ein Nedarim Nishalim L'Chacham. According to Rava, that said that by being Pesach B'Kavod HaMokum, people are going to absolve their own vows. Well, Hacha Amai Poslan, why over here did Chachamim agree with Rebbe Lezer that you can use Kvod Avavimo as a Pesach? Let's take a look at the Rashi. Elo L'Rava. Rashi we're looking at is across from here. Elo L'Rava Diomar Hainu Taimo Mishum Dein Nedarim Nishalom L'Chacham Hacha Nami B'Nedarim Shebeino Leveino Avavimo Amai Modu Rabbanan. Why do the Rabbanan concede over here that you can be Posach B'Kvod Avavimo? Hanami Lo Asu L'Shilei L'Chacham. This kind of vow also, a person will not come to the Chacham U'Matiu Batzmo. He'll annul it on his own. B'Chvod Avavimo, using the parent's honor as a basis. The Gemara answers, Amri, Kevan Dechol Nidri Lo Sugya Lahon De Lav Chacham Hachanami Poschen. Rashi, Omar, Amri, we answer the objection to Rava as follows: Kevon Dishar Nedarim Lo Sagi Below Sheila L'Chacham. Since other vows one needs to go to a Chacham, Mishum De'ein Poschen B'Chvod Avav Imo, because of the rabbi's position, the Chachamim's position, that you don't use Kvod Avav Imo as a basis for vow annulment, Shelo Yatir Ba'atzmo, so as not to coming to annul for yourself. Hacha B'Neder Shebeino Levein Avav Imo Modu Rabbana De Poschen. Since in all other cases we don't use Kvod Avav Imo as a basis for vow annulment, and therefore a person is going to have to go to a Chacham. In this case, the Rabbanan agree, they concede that will allow you to use Kvod Avav Imo as basis. The B'Shvil Hai Neder Greda, the Paschu B'Chvod Avav Imo, because of this particular vow, where the rabbis allowed using Kvod Avav Imo as a basis for the annulment, Lo Asila Meimar, a person isn't going to come to think Ein Nedarim Nishalim L'Chacham, Kevan Dekulu Nedarim Ba'amo Nishalim L'Chacham. Since all other vows, one does have to turn to the Chacham. So in this case, in this isolated type neder, we will relax our position and allow Pesach B'Chvod Avav Imo. Once again, and why is that? Because in all other vows, as a result of the stance taken by the Chachamim, that we do not allow a Pesach B'Chvod Avav Imo, there is no fear that in this case a person will end up absolving himself of the vow. The Gemara continues. V'oid Omar Rabbi Eliezer Poischen ben Noilad v'chulei. My time of the Rabbi Eliezer. Here we have a double underline marking on the side of the Gemara under the Nosei Mivneh. We've indicated Ta'amam Shel Rebbe Ozer v'Rabbanan b'Machloikis in Poischen ben Noilad. We feature the reasons for each position. So, what is the basis for Rebbe Lezer that we are posech benolad. Omar Rav Chisda Amar Kra. The pasuk says regarding Moshe Rabbeinu, who was at the time that this pasuk appears, is located by his father-in-law Yisro in the country of Midian, after having run away from Egypt. That is, after Moshe Rabbeinu had run away from Egypt, the Almighty appears to Moshe and says, go back to Mitzrayim. And the Almighty says, go back to Mitzrayim, ki mesu kol ha'anoshim, the people that were responsible for your for your running away from Mitzrayim, and as a result of your running away from Mitzrayim and reaching the home of Yisro and vowing to stay with him, the initial reason is no longer applicable. Why? Because the men that were seeking you out are no longer alive. V'hamisa denoladhu. The issue of death is something that is a new circumstance. Those people that were seeking him out, we'll see later how they have to do with Dosan and Aviram. According to the simple reading of the pasuk, they have since died. So that their death is a new point of information, and nevertheless, Moshe Rabbeinu was able to use that as the basis of absolving the vow. The Rashi, ki mesu kol anoshim lefi shenodar Moshe liyisro sheloloshiv Mitzrayim b'shvoloisa anoshim avakshim es nafsho. Because Moshe Rabbeinu had vowed to Yisro that he's not going to go back to Mitzrayim because of the men that were seeking him, that were seeking revenge or seeking to kill him. Can Meforsh come on Vayoel Moshe, Pasuk in Shmos Perek Beis, Pasuk of Aleph says Vayoel Moshe Pasach lo Mokum Bekach. Vayoel Moshe meant and Moshe had vowed to Yisro not to leave because of those men that were seeking him, and the Almighty allowed Moshe Rabbeinu to absolve himself of the vow. Bekach lech shuv Mitzrayim umuter l'chal kedin shebeshviloisen shenadartik kvar meisim hein. For the reason that you made the vow is no longer applicable because they're dead. So what do you see from this? You see that a vow can be rescinded based on later developments, which we call nolad. V'Rabbanan ma'tamaya. What's the basis of the Rabbanan? So you notice we have a long answer marking. Kosavri hano mi maisi. The Rabbanan response is, did they really die? V'ho Omar Rav Yochanan mishum Rav Yishmael ben Yochai. Kol mokum shneimar nitzim v'nitzavim. Whenever you see these words in the Torah, einon elo dosan v'aviram. It's a reference to those wicked individuals, dosan and aviram. Those were the people that were seeking Moshe Rabbeinu's life. And those very people were still alive at this point that the Almighty is saying, go back to Mitzrayim. So there's no issue of nolad in terms of their having died. They were still alive. Rather, what the pasuk means is they became impoverished. And Tosfos says, very importantly, he says, ubenolad kihai the oini modu rabbanan. It's true that their impoverishment may very well have been a new development, but that's not considered nolad. And the Rosh adds one word. Why is it not considered nolad? Because it's a common thing. People have money one day and lose it the next day. Very common situation. And therefore, the Almighty was saying, the people that were seeking your life out, they're no longer a threat. They've become impoverished. And as we said before, that's not a problem of nolad, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu was able to go back. But there's no proof then, according to Rabbanan, from here that poischen benolad. Omar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Kol Odom she'ein loy bonim choshuv kemes. In light of what we just said regarding Dosan and Aviram having become impoverished, and as a result, the Torah used the term mesu, you have another example. Someone who has no children is considered like a person who is dead. Shenemar, and it's based on a pasuk. It's Rochel says to her husband Yaakov Avinu, Hava li bonim, provide for me children. I want you to be with me so that we can have children together. V'im ayin meisa anochin. If not, I am like dead. V'tanya arba chashuvim kemes. There are 4 that are considered like the dead. Tosfos adds that categorizing people as like dead has practical bearing for prayer. In other words, you're dealing with a very dire situation, and therefore prayer is necessary. So you have 4 people that are considered like dead: Oni umitzora v'suma umi she'ein lo bonim. A person who is impoverished, a person who is afflicted with tsaras, a blind individual, and someone that is childless. And here you can see with the diamonds we've highlighted these 4 individuals, and the Gemara will provide sources for each one of these points. Ani, the issue of impoverishment, as we saw before, ki dichtiv ki mesu kol ho'anoshim. The reference to Dosan Aviram, they were mesu, and the Rosh in his commentary, he points out they weren't mitzoroyim, and had they been wealthy individuals, they still would have been able to affect Moshe Rabbeinu through the fact that they commanded power, even if they had been mitzoroyim. So you see from here that they were not mitzoroyim, in other words, they were not wealthy, and the idea of their not being mitzoroyim, they would have been outside of the camp had they been mitzoroyim. So they were not afflicted with tsaras, nor would they have been considered wealthy. Otherwise, as we said, they would have been able to affect Moshe Rabbeinu. They were not blind at that point either, which the Rosh proves with a pasuk. And they had children. So the only thing that's really left for us to conclude is that they had been impoverished. The Gemara continues, Mitzorah. Where do we see that a Mitzorah is considered like dead? The pasuk says with regard to Miriam, who had been afflicted with tsaras, al no tehi kames. The prayer made for was, let her not be considered like dead. At that point, when she was afflicted with tsaras. The suma, a blind individual, dichtiv, the pasuk says, b'mechshachim oshivani kemeisei olam. B'mechshachim means in the darkness. And in darkness one does not see. And hence, he is considered in this pasuk like the dead. Umi she'ein lo bonim, dichtiv hava li bonim v'im ayin meisa anochi. Which, this pasuk we saw quoted above with Rachel, desirous of children, which at that point she had none of. And if she doesn't have children, she considers herself like dead. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.